Chapter 371. Could use the help. The next morning brought the sound of troops moving and chaos within the city as thousands of men rushed in to grab last-minute essentials before heading out on a mission. Duke Dominic, good morning. We have received orders from the king late last night. The majority of the accompanying troops will be deployed to clear the area and ensure its security while the meetings are ongoing. 100 men from each of our contingents will be left behind to guard the event, so we will be relying on your local guard force for the rest. Prince Russell informed him the moment that Dominic came down for breakfast. Well, that should certainly help clean out the monsters in the area. Do we have airships scouting? He replied. Indeed. They left at first light, though the majority of the troops will be mounted cavalry and traveling by land. The plan is that they will be able to flush out hiding monsters that the airships do not see, and possibly able to provoke another portal incident, drawing Kaizen's rebels into the battle and removing them from being a threat to the cities. Russell explained. That sounds like a good and logical idea. Flying over the monsters doesn't disturb them. They don't recognize airships as a threat like they do bird-type monsters. Well, they might not recognize them here either. I don't think that there are any species of bird monsters native to Signia large enough to threaten a goblin. Dominic corrected himself with a shrug. Prince Russell laughed. No birds are a threat to goblins. They taste as bad as they smell, and the bird monsters usually only hunt for food, not for sport. That reminds me, I have 20 rifles to hand out. If you can call in one of your officers, I will let them choose who gets the first batch, and I will spend the day making more. I might be a terrible host, gone into the forge all day, but there simply isn't anyone else to do the work. Even if we found someone with the skills, I don't have a blueprint to make them, I do it from memory. Dominic explained. The youngest of the princes present simply smiled in response. Don't even worry about it. We can generally entertain ourselves, and Alexis is there to keep us under control. The meetings today aren't going to be all that serious, as we're waiting on reports from our home nations. Most of what we will be doing is just catching up on paperwork and waiting for reports from the soldiers to come in. With 9 groups from each of the 3 forces spreading out through the duchy, we will have all the deployment reports that we could ever hope to read. Dominic laughed. You have a point. Reading the reports filed by one unit was enough, and I was with them at the time. I can only imagine that the reports of so many will be a full-time job for someone. Dominic made his way to the forge for the morning and began to prep the molds for the castings. They needed to be cleaned, and he would brush them with mana oil as a release agent so that nothing stuck, though the clay-to-steel transformation normally prevented that issue. He was just about to prep the clay when a small person in tan robes that looked like they were made as desert camouflage entered. Her face was mostly covered, leaving only her eyes showing, but that was normal for the desert environment that outfit was made for. I can help you with that if you're looking to hire an assistant? The girl's voice asked hopefully. I might be, but normally, girls with promise would go to Alexis to be trained. Dominic replied. The girl laughed. You know. Thank you, but I'd rather not be a domestic servant, even if her veiled maids are pretty skilled in combat. I saw them training on the way over. I'm from the Duskblade sect, but my potential is low, so I'm looking for a side job to help buy resources. Dominic nodded. All right then. Do you know how to mix clay? The girl nodded. I do. You want it to press into the forms, not to cast on a spinning wheel, right? Precisely. I need to make as many rifles as possible for the troops so that we can deal with the Dago's threat. Dominic agreed. Will you be making pistols later? I heard that you have a most wonderful mana revolver blueprint, and I would love to see it in action. Dominic narrowed his eyes. Knowing that he could make mana revolvers was one thing, but what good would it do to watch him if she lacked the skills to learn? Obviously, she wasn't as weak as she let on, or she wouldn't have even been accepted into the Duskblade sect to start with. Is the goal to learn to make them, or to find a chance to steal my blueprint? Dominic asked. The girl smiled. Are you always this suspicious? Nope. It's normally worse, but I have a soft spot for cute kids and anyone willing to help with my work. So, which is it? I want to learn to make them. Do you have any idea how high my status in the sect would go if I could become an actual gunsmith? I mean, I'll never be a true smith. I'm not going to give up the trade skill core that the sect gave me. But if I could make pistols for our agents, I might even make Elder one day. Dominic smiled. Show me the trade skill core and I will consider it. What is your name, young mage? Reluctantly, she pulled up her sleeve, revealing a flawlessly smooth and pale arm. That was the sort of skin nobody got naturally. Those sorts of jade beauties only existed because magic could fix imperfections. That alone told Dominic all that he needed to know about her status in the sect. She wasn't at the bottom. Far from it. She was training as a honeypot assassin, flawless and appealing in every way. But today she was hiding herself to try to learn a new skill that would give her a future other than seducing assassination targets. But what was attached to the arm was the shocking part. A simple red cloth armband held a vibrantly glowing red gem, so dark it was almost black. Amy, acolyte of the Duskblade sect, and now your assistant gunsmith, at your service. Chapter 372. Not So Secret Method. There were only two ways that a trade skill core would turn out that color. One was that, like Dominic, their past was soaked in blood. But if the vitality of their victims was used to fuel the advancement of the wearer, the gem would turn a deep red and then slowly fade to black as the demonic magic corrupted the original trade skill core. Completely normal for assassins and far too common among ambitious mages. But what it told Dominic was that young Amy, despite her flawless and fragile appearance, was not afraid to get her hands dirty. Or there was a second possibility. She might not be human at all. Many species of demons could take a human form using innate disguise magic. If that was the case, then her history and personality wouldn't make a difference, as the only progression that she would ever make was an increase in demonic energy. Not corrupting her, but because the magic of the demon species was no more similar to human magic than Dominic's own draconic magic. Fortunately for Dominic, his magic didn't corrupt the color of spell gems. Amy let her sleeve fall, then carefully tied both sleeves up, leaving her forearms exposed as she mixed the clay. It kept her sleeves out of the wet mixture, and she was surprisingly strong for her size, either from magical enhancement or innate ability. But she could mix the mud, and she had the consistency right, so Dominic didn't see any reason to turn down her offer, even if he was going to keep an eye on her. Dominic finished prepping the molds, and Amy scooped the clay in. With the two of them working, it was a much faster process, and Dominic added a tray of forms for making the mana pistols to the table. Since this is what you came to see, we will work on them while the rifles dry. There is a bit of downtime in the day, between enchanting one batch and starting on the next. It's a good time for lunch, but I will just have you go fetch the food, and we can work while we eat. Dominic explained. He didn't miss the amused noise that Amy made. You're enjoying the thought of having your own apprentice to boss around, aren't you? Very much so, yes. Plus, this apprentice was a mage with a high-level trade skill core. There was no chance that they were going to overtake him in skill and start demanding raises or journeyman status at their own shop. If anything, she might quit on him and start working for the Duskblade sect directly. But the sect lived in town, their tower was almost finished. It wouldn't be that big of a change. He could just steal her back when he was busy. The sect master wouldn't turn him down, even if Amy actually came here without his knowledge today, which Dominic highly doubted. Old mages liked to know everything, especially about their acolytes. Dominic cast the first transformation and emptied the molds as Amy got right to work refilling them to make the next batch. Dominic didn't usually do that, he just made parts as he needed them. But mostly it was because getting the clay just right and shaking the air bubbles out of the forms took so long that he would lose a whole day if he stockpiled parts. They worked in silence, with the young mage watching carefully as Dominic prepared the rifle parts for assembly. You really have a smooth system, you know? She commented as Dominic ran a thread tap through a receiver, checking for any burrs. I had a lot of practice during the war. Now, since you were interested in gunsmithing tricks, I will tell you one. You see, most gunsmiths press-fit the parts and then seal them. I thread them in for a more secure fit, and then seal them. Most of the seal is on the inside, then you just torch the brazing rod, and let it seal the top. Nice and solid, not coming out or leaking. It takes some grinding to take it back apart again, but it's totally worth it. Even when these rifles are battered and abused by soldiers, they should still work reliably in any conditions. Dominic narrated as he performed the steps he was referring to. Amy nodded and gestured to the parts molds, which were ready for Dominic to transform the clay. A surge of mana, and the assistant got busy sorting the parts into bins next to the jigs for drilling and precision machining. Dominic continued with the same steps on the other 10 rifles for the morning, while Amy prepared more parts. A full day like this, and he wouldn't have to wait on prep work all week. Having an assistant was a wonderful thing, with the extra help and someone to hand him parts, so he never had to go looking for anything. Dominic had the first batch of rifles assembled and ready for enchantment well before noon. So early, in fact, that he was considering doing a second batch and enchanting them all at once. Then it occurred to him that the enchanting process that he used was technically a state secret of the Signia military. Sure, they didn't usually put a crushed mana core into the oil solution or top it off with mana between uses. But the process was not the standard enchanting method, and it was so much more resource efficient than using a full monster core for every weapon that there was no way that Amy wouldn't spread the word. And that left him with a dilemma. What was he going to do about it? He could kick the assistant out for the process, but that would just encourage her to spy. Or he could have her swear to secrecy, which was likely to mean nothing if questioned by her sect master. Loyalty to the sect always came first, especially for a sect full of mercenary mages, whose lives depended on being able to trust each other. Dominic sighed as he looked at the 10 rifles ready for enchantment. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this forge. Not even to your sect master or your elders. If you can't do that, I will need you to wait in the house until I call for lunch. You have my word. Nothing I see here is anything but confidential. Dominic nodded. He would trust that promise for now. Then Amy smiled. You know, the Duskblade sect is one of the mage sects that knows how to make mana oil, right? Well, that just made things a whole lot easier. Chapter 373. Doing it wrong. If the Duskblade sect already knew about the mana oil, and they could make it, then there was no reason to hide it from Amy. The final changes that he had made were something that any mage could do, if they knew how, so it probably wasn't even unique to him. Just not widely publicized, so that others didn't copy the technique and start to compete with the ones who had figured out the trick. Dominic took out the oil he had used for the last one and filled the tubes for the oil bath enchantment of the rifles. Normally, he did one at a time, but there was really no reason that he couldn't heat and dunk all 10, as long as he was charging the mana in the oil beforehand. It was a simple process, made for human smiths with no affinity for magic. Nearly impossible for him to mess up. Amy stared at him as he worked, heating the rifles so the mana core stuck to them, and then dunking them for their magical upgrade. I might not be anything like a blacksmith, but I am completely sure that the mana oil is a one-time use product, and you're supposed to paint it on in multiple layers before heating. She commented. Dominic looked at the tubes of oil with suspicion. Mana oil was supposed to be used like a varnish or enamel finish and baked on after application. That actually made a lot of sense. But using it as a tempering oil worked so well. I suppose that I'm probably using it wrong, but look how well it works. Oh, of course you can't tell yet. Here, let me hang them up to dry, and then you'll understand. Dominic explained. The rifles were quickly removed and hung near the forge to drip dry. However, when Dominic examined them, this batch was different from the ones that he had done before. Previously, they turned a lovely gun blue color after enchanting, with the copper stalks remaining their original tone. But this batch was completely black, including the copper. It only took him a moment to realize that Amy had been the one who made the copper for him, instead of grabbing sheets that he had already made. So, the blackened effect should be a result of her magic interacting with his enchanting process. Honestly, that might be an improvement. Hunters didn't want their rifles reflecting any light. Of course, these would likely be wrapped to prevent heat transfer, and gunblue didn't reflect much light to begin with, so it was a small matter. But enough that they were visibly different from previous batches. Amy examined the row of hanging rifles and barely caught herself before she could touch them and get oil all over her hands. That is remarkable. 1 layer, all uncommon grade, all level 6. Is that from the monster core that you are using on them? She asked. Dominic nodded. Yes, The core dust is the catalyst to infuse the magic into the item, the same as the standard technique. But immersed in the mana oil. A higher grade core will give better results, but I would have to be using strong enough magic to fully charge the core dust between uses, and that is much more difficult than working with a manufacturing process at this level. Amy nodded slowly as she stared at the rifles. So, we just wait for the oil to dry and then you're done? Dominic shook his head. No, they're done now. I just let the oil drip back into a collection tray, so I can keep using it. They just need to be wiped down once they're mostly ready. The head and the mana combine to make the oil soak into the piece, and the color changes when the enchantment is activated. After that, nothing more will change. So, these are about ready, and the fire will dry them in a few minutes. Why don't we work on a set of mana pistols? You've been patiently waiting to see the process, and they're a popular item to sell to the merchant guild caravans. Probably to the adventurers too, as long as I don't make them too high level. The standardized pricing for magical weapons does make them a bit prohibitive to acquire. So, you can actually make better rifles than these? Why don't you? Amy asked, not following his logic. If a mage from your sect was issued a rare grade level 20 weapon, how do you think that they would react? Forget the fact that it uses a far more resources and precious materials. Just go by the reaction of the common mercenary mage. Dominic asked. You have a point. They would probably pee themselves, then have a heart attack and maybe cry with joy. Not the elders, of course. They're all stoic and such. But I can't say that I wouldn't freak out. She agreed. Not just that, but think of how much those are worth on the open market. It would make everyone who is issued that sort of weapon a target for bandits. Amy smiled. Bandits aren't so scary when you see them coming. But when they sneak up and ambush you, even mages can get in trouble fast. Now that we're on the same page, I will make the mana revolvers. As you can see here, the Magitech circuits are very similar to the ones in the rifles, as they are the basis for the mana round option on the other weapon. The two weapons are actually very similar in function, though not in appearance. So, once I finish the inscription of the circuitry, I link it to the circuits for the handle-mounted socket, in case the wielder wants a spell gem. Personally, I don't like that setup. The gems stick out from the handle, and they're not comfortable to hold. But nearly everyone who buys one of the pistols wants the option, and there really isn't a better place to put them except on the butt of the handle, and that has its own drawbacks. Dominic narrated as he prepared the pistols. This time he dropped them all in the same bucket after heating, with just enough time to recharge the mana in between. Now, we pull them out, let them hang for a bit, and call it a morning. We will repeat the process after lunch. Amy smiled. That is wonderful. I will go get the food, and I will be right back. Chapter 374. In all the right ways. Over the next 4 days, the weapons began to pile up in Dominic's storage ring. The soldiers who needed them were out of town already, and there hadn't been a merchant caravan to sell the pistols to. Amy had been a great help in the forge, and now she was handling almost everything related to the clay, with Dominic only stepping in for the clay to steel, transformation, and any custom alterations that they wanted to make to the pieces. Can you make other weapons? Or did you train exclusively as a gunsmith? Amy asked one afternoon as they took their lunch break. I was Pop's apprentice and worked in the Signia Royal Weapon Forge. I can make tools, frying pans, even swords, spears, and warhammers. It's just that there aren't many who can make guns, and a bit of draconic lineage really helps the process. You see, I don't have to precisely follow the formula to make things work. There is no construction ritual or need to build magic by layers as I assemble the weapons to get more complex effects. There also is a much lower chance that I will fail. That's why the Royal Forge uses mana oil for all the apprentices. It's something that they can do without needing any magical aptitude. The journeymen in the city usually focus on higher grade and higher level pieces in low quantity. I suppose you could say that I take the apprentice approach with rifles as well. By the end of the day, I'll have 100 of them ready to distribute to the troops, all uncommon quality, which is the best of what the forge apprentices turn out. That will probably be enough for our purposes, and then we can focus either on fancy stuff or something for the higher nobles and the elders of the sect. Was there anything that the Duskblade sect was still short on? Amy smiled as she heard Dominic's question. There are always things that the elders want. But they've been focused on getting the school ready. I bet that if we called one over here, they would trade something good for one of these pistols we've been making. I know that you said that the Merchants Guild likes to buy them all, but the mages are going to love them. Mana pistols are somewhat rare, especially in the desert. But being able to shoot targets that charge you while you're casting would be a huge benefit. Dominic laughed. It's good the other way around as well. Shooting mages halfway through a grand invocation makes life a whole lot easier. Even the royal guards have started to use the tactic. It probably wouldn't be as effective against battle mages like the ones in the Duskblade sect who have trained in physical combat. But against academic mages, it's glorious. Amy laughed. You know, the sect jokes about that all the time. The academics have so much book knowledge but no common sense. Most of them don't even wear armor or train in how to handle weapons. It's like it never occurred to them that nobody was going to give them time to cast their grand spells. The sect doesn't often get missions to deal with renegade mages. They're less common than missions for a simple assassination or monster control. But nomadic sects are always in competition with each other, and until we're fully settled here, there is still the chance that someone will challenge for our right to operate the tower. Dominic shrugged. I am not against allowing another mage tower to go up. But there is no motivation for me to allow a challenge to the school when we have a perfectly good working relationship. They were almost finished for the day when Elder Manif knocked at the door to the forge and waved at Amy. So, that's where you've gotten to lately. I had come to chat with Duke Dominic if he has a minute. The elder explained. Come and take a seat. We're just cleaning up for the evening. Dominic greeted him as he cleaned and polished a mana revolver. The first thing that he noticed was that the elder looked particularly uncomfortable with Amy handling the revolver, but she was quite proficient, and the weapon was unloaded. So it was more likely
Who?
than the
How?
that was causing his nervousness. After working with her for most of a week, Dominic had long suspected that Amy was not nearly as young as she looked, and not just because of the fully corrupted state of her trade skill core. Seeing Elder Manif's response to her lovingly polishing a revolver was the final confirmation needed that his new assistant was much more dangerous than she let on. Elder Manif cleared his throat. Right, where was I? I was hoping that you would be interested in trading some of your mana revolvers for personal tutoring. I am told that you never found time for proper training in your magical skills, and that you were interested in materia gem creation. Dominic smiled. Most definitely. Particularly, the common gems for Magitech orbs and creating spell gems. I know that the sect has no problem supplying them, but it would make my life much easier if I could make what I needed for my experiments with Magitech. Elder Manif nodded and took out a book. Learning to create them isn't hard. Do you know how to make mana crystals? Yeah, the second Prince of Signia taught me that much, but we haven't seen each other since then to continue the lessons. The elder smiled softly. Well, I won't pretend to be as skilled as that particular archmage. The second Prince of Signia has accomplished more in the field of magic than any of the elders, despite being a century younger than most. However, I can teach you how to make the materia gems as well as common magical gems for your engineering. Gem creation is a simple spell, though at lower levels the number of flaws in the synthetic gems is exceptionally high, and it may take dozens of tries to get a usable one. Dominic shrugged. Well, I can work around that. Just knowing how to do it is half the battle. Chapter 375, Tutoring Offer. Elder Manif sat down at the table and brought out 2 gems and a book. Now for the reason I'm here. I was hoping that you would be interested in trading some lessons for that most wonderful revolver you've made. He explained. Dominic shrugged. I won't object to that. I need training in magic, both to use combat spells and for practical purposes. I don't see any issue trading you a pistol for it. We've made a few of them. Manif's eyes flickered to Amy, who was caressing the now gleaming weapon in her hands like a lover. But Dominic took out another and placed it on the table between them. Now, what do we have here? Dominic continued. The essential spells you were most likely thinking of. Spell amplification and create gems. Spell amplification is the magical equivalent of the strength gems, in that it adds a small boost to your spell casting above the actual level of your spell gem. Create gems is the one that you'll need for all sorts of Magitech work. Both are core skills of a mage sect, and not normally sold outside the sect. But this case is somewhat special. Not just because you're the local duke, but because we are here to establish a school. Like you, we also believe that Westover would be better off if everyone had some magical skills. Those who cannot learn them are at a disadvantage, and we hope that everyone can at least be trained to the level of the Royal Paladins by the time that they finish basic schooling. Manif explained. Getting holy cores to train more paladins and clerics won't be easy, but I understand what you mean. If the average resident can use area barrier and slash, at the very least they will be much more safe living in rural areas and traveling. Dominic agreed. I'm glad we're on the same page. Now, the spell gems are useful, and I believe that you don't have either of them. But the book is the real treasure. It is the one that you said you were hoping the second prince would bring you. Materia Gem Creation. This tome contains the trick to making new spell gems, which are necessary for many advanced Magitech items, as well as the basis for the trade skill core that you will understand how to make when you reach master rank on your blacksmithing core. There are secrets to every trade skill core, so they're not so easy to make. But recreating gems for spells that you know isn't terribly hard once you know the technique. It's just that it takes a lot of work, and that makes them valuable. What you should know before you start is that there are two types of spell gems. One is intended to be used as a spell by a person. The other is intended to create a spell effect when placed in an item. The ones intended to be placed in an item are impossible to attune. They are the source of most fake spell gems. Looters will tear down a Magitech item and attempt to resell the gem, which appears genuine at first glance, as it is not attuned. Only once it is sold will the buyer realize that it cannot be attuned, unless they're a mage. So that is the first thing to keep in mind both as you're learning the skill and when you're making them for Magitech items. Make the version that cannot be attuned to use with Magitech items unless you want to make a personalized item. If you use an attunable gem, all gems in the item must be capable of attunement, or the item won't work after the process starts. But if you do it that way, you can make a weapon that bonds to one particular user. There are some weapons like that within the royal families, mostly as heirlooms now. But when mages are making items for themselves, they will sometimes do it to prevent theft. Dominic smiled at that part of the mage's description. You have a point. An attuned item is completely worthless to anyone else. If they don't want you to have it, all they can do is destroy it or hide it from you. They can't sell it or turn it against you. Well, most of the time. Elder Manif gave him a confused look. Most of the time? Well, if you attune a morning star for your personal use, I wouldn't be able to activate the spells on it. But I could still grab it and beat you with it. Dominic elaborated. Amy giggled, which caught Dominic's attention. Sorry, that exact reason is why wands fell out of favor with most mages. The spellbook shape is much less likely to be used in horrific and painful ways by bullies in school. Elder Manif rolled his eyes. If anything, Amy was likely to have been the bully who would threaten to stick your wand where the sun doesn't shine than the one being bullied. You know, that makes a twisted sort of sense. Pops made me a scepter with added spell damage as an effect. Dominic noted. Preventative violence. I like it. Amy agreed. Elder Manif smiled. If you can't cast fast enough, just beat them to death with a scepter? How utterly dwarven. But he's not wrong. Most dwarven mages carry a hammer or a scepter instead of a wand, while human mages usually go for a staff or a spellbook. The staff is clunky and easy to spot, marking you as a mage. So, it's not as common these days. But I'm told that you have a spellbook-style casting device. Dominic shook his head. No, it's an actual spellbook. The Sorcerer's Spellbook, a Magitech item. Elder Manif's eyes went wide. And you can use it? The Duskblade sect also owns one, but nobody can attune to it. The design is flawed. However, it contains a copy of every spell that has ever been turned into the sect warehouse. It's the greatest grimoire that a sect can obtain. Chapter 376, The Good Book. Dominic winked at the elder. The design isn't flawed, it's restricted. I believe that the creator of the Sorcerer's Spellbook intended it for his own personal use, and after his death, someone tried to copy it. The original is likely a legendary grimoire somewhere, but the copies have some of the same restrictions on them that the original did, so only a very limited selection of people can use it. Elder Manif sighed. So, you can unlock the hidden knowledge? Dominic laughed and shook his head. There is no hidden knowledge in a sorcerer's spellbook. It's made to be used. Actually used. You see, it's a scalable Magitech item that can be leveled up like any other Magitech core. Improving the level of the spellbook increases the usable level of the spells stored inside it. Elder Manif looked impressed, while Amy laughed hysterically. That is absolutely terrifying on a whole different level. Can you imagine what would happen if someone like the second prince managed to attune that? An archmage that can use every spell he knows at level 40? He would be unstoppable. She cackled. Manif looked horrified as he realized the implication. She's got a point. Once you attune these gems, you'll be able to use them at the level of your spellbook. Well, perhaps not spell amplification. Like a strength gem, it's a passive buff. Dominic nodded in agreement. The passive spells did actually work when stored in the spellbook. He just had to activate the spell once, and it would stay active until deactivated. But there was no need to tell the Elder that when he was already concerned about the strength of the magical item. Yes, I will be way ahead with the create gem effects. I am quite looking forward to it, but some lessons on materia gem creation so I can make spell gems for more powerful Magitech items would be wonderful. Think of all the lovely things I could make. Better tractors, improved airships, even a fully self-contained roadwork machine, whose users won't need to know any of the spells. Dominic's voice was a bit dreamy at the end, and the two mages smiled at his very domestic ambitions. Everything that Dominic was thinking of for Magitech devices was something that would help the duchy grow and prosper. None of it was something that would help him personally, other than in the financial sense if he sold it. They couldn't tell if he was the least or the most ambitious man they had ever met. All right, why don't we start on the lesson now? Acolyte Amy, you can return home if you wish, or sit in on the lesson. You already know the contents, though. Elder Manif suggested. Amy shrugged. There is no harm in sitting in on the process. If we're going to be in the forge for hours anyhow, I will start making parts for tomorrow, and Lord Dominic can convert them, as I don't have the clay to steel spell at a sufficient level. What level is yours at? Dominic asked. I know the spell, but I don't have an attuned gem. So, it casts at my innate level, which is 2. Far from sufficient for that particular spell. I do have a clay to copper gem at level 5, though. That turns out quality copper. Then, she laughed at Dominic's expression.
Right.
Of course you knew that. I've been using it for like a week straight now. Elder Manif opened the training book and turned it to Dominic. It will be easier if you read through the book and then meet with me tomorrow to begin the lessons once you understand the basics. It is many hours of reading, but getting through the first chapters so you understand the concept should be possible in an evening. Dominic nodded. That should be possible. We've got some time, as we finished early. Amy, if you want to make parts for tomorrow, we can get ahead on our work while I study late. Don't forget that you're needed in for dinner. Amy reminded him. Can't miss the important parts. Elder Manif, would you like to join us? Dinner will be ready soon, and all are welcome, as you're already here at the manor. Dominic asked. That sounds wonderful. Miss Beth's cooking is far beyond the standard of anyone in our sect. A royal head chef might not officially be a master craftsman, but they deserve the title. Inside the manor, the mood was much less relaxed than it had been in the forge. Highness, are you sure that is a good idea? The king is not going to take it well. An officer was asking Crown Prince Claudius. He will get over it. Fahad has already sent the message home. Claudius replied. Alexis looked exhausted, while Prince Russell was obviously frustrated, and Prince George was staring intently at his drink. What did I miss? Dominic asked as he took his seat. The airships found what they think is the main monster force, and they're not Indagos. They're south of us in the hills by the Mitfield border. Claudius explained. All right, we know where they are so we can send troops. That's a good thing. Dominic replied. Claudius sighed. And that is what I ordered. But it's not that easy. Prince Fahad nodded. While my Axbridge and your Signia have an alliance, moving thousands or tens of thousands of soldiers within another nation is not a small matter. Stationing a delegation here is an approved political event, but sending them to wage war within Signia's borders. Dominic frowned as he realized the issue. The nobles would not take it well if they found out that there were foreign armies active within Signia. Having them protect an emissary was a show of force, but expected. Allowing them to actually draw weapons and fight in any way but defensively was practically a declaration of war, or an open insult, suggesting that Signia couldn't defend its own territory. None of those outcomes were good. But if there were enough monsters to call it Dago's main monster force, it wasn't something that the Signia force stationed here could deal with. I have Elder Manif here from the Duskblade sect. They might be able to help with logistics, so the troops aren't marching hundreds of kilometers across open territory. Will that help? Dominic suggested. In a practical sense, yes. Very much so. In a political sense, not at all. Chapter 377. Creative Deployment Orders. The dinner table fell silent for a moment as everyone contemplated the repercussions of what Crown Prince Claudius had ordered, the deployment of foreign forces within Signia's borders. I say that we lie if anyone asks. I am comfortable telling everyone that we hired a collection of mercenary forces to do the job of eliminating the monsters for us. In fact, I will even go with a group of adventurers and some of our local mages, so I can give a memory extract as proof to the royal court. Dominic suggested. Prince Russell looked at him in horror. You can't lie to the royal court's memory extraction. Dominic smiled. Let me tell you a fun story. Many years ago, when I was just a little dragonkin, I was scooped up by the Redsham City Guards on the shores of Trenelton Lake in Axbridge. They had been told that I witnessed a murder and assumed that I simply refused to tell them who it was because they were the authorities. So, they brought me to their magistrate, who had a memory extraction spell. He cast it for relevant information of the event, and I realized that while you can't alter what they see, the context is just as important as the details. If my memory shows that I was out for multiple days with adventurers and that I paid them, followed by not seeing anyone in uniform. The other smiled as he trailed off. Then they will naturally come to the conclusion that is what really happened, and the reports of foreign armies mobilizing were overstated. Or possibly that you approved them to work as mercenaries while they were stationed here, which is politically problematic, but not technically illegal. Prince Russell reluctantly agreed. Normally, the issue would be their commanders charging them with desertion for such an action. But as we will all agree to approve it, that won't be an issue. It's not going to be good for the Duke's reputation, but half of the continent thinks that he's a genocidal psychopath. How much worse can it get? Prince Fahad joked. Dominic shrugged, while the officers and mages seated further down the table laughed quietly. Normally, the low conversation drowned out whatever the royals were saying, but today, nobody else was speaking. The proposals that were being discussed were too important, and none of the officers dared to take an action that would reflect negatively on their career. Being dismissed for poor conduct would ruin their families and disqualify them from their pensions, as paltry as they were. From the sound of it, things shouldn't get that far, and the top brass would conveniently look the other way, or possibly join in on the festivities. But if they were moonlighting as mercenaries, did that mean that they didn't have to turn in the loot? The army claimed all the resources obtained from military actions to be distributed based on rank and contribution, with a cut to the nation. A heavy cut. But if they were mercenaries, even for one mission, they might be able to make out like bandits off the number of monster cores that they could obtain. Hopefully, someone would mention that, so they didn't have to discuss it directly. If we have a willing scapegoat, I don't see a reason that we can't get working on the mission. Those monsters need to go, before they're used against us, and not just the cities of Dagos. But the elimination of that force is also directly tied to our purpose in being here. The stability of the region. That alone should be enough of an excuse to smooth over any outrage about our actions, as long as we have a way to justify them as legal. Prince George suggested. His own troops could pretend that they ran into the monsters on their way home. It was a direct enough route to justify their presence in the area. But going that direction did not make any sense for any of the other princes, as their nations didn't have a single city in that direction. Not that Signia needed the excuse. This was their territory, and they could send all the soldiers they wanted in any direction they wanted. When are we planning to leave? One of the officers asked. The day after tomorrow. The soldiers need 1 full day to prepare to mobilize, and we need to arrange mages to open portals to the area. We may need to fly them there by airship so that they can open the portals in the desired locations, allowing us to surround the monsters without arriving too close and triggering a counterattack before we are in position. Prince Claudius decided. Should I go first? If I'm in position with a tracker, the mages can pinpoint my location and send the troops based on that. It will also help build the story of mercenaries going to hunt monsters. There are a bunch already in town, and they aren't likely to say no to the chance of a big payday. Dominic suggested. Alexis smiled. See, I told you that we should tell him first. If there is a way to justify a massacre of Dago's forces, he is our resident expert. Dominic considered his options, then wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders. You know that this story doesn't work if you and the Royal Guard are with me, right? He asked. Alexis nodded. I will be here with the Royal Guard and the City Guard, in case there is a counterattack. Each force will also leave their reserves here, and someone needs to lead them if Dagos takes the opportunity to attack Westover. She might not be wrong. Once the attack started, everyone would assume that Westover was left undefended, and that it would be an easy fight. In that case, would you like to distribute the rifles that I've been making to the locals? I have 100 level 6 uncommon rifles for someone. They were going to go to the officers, but if you're going to be short-handed, I can make them their batch after the battle. Dominic asked. Alexis shook her head. The actual guard already has rifles, as do the hunters. We would have to train anyone else. There isn't time, but the soldiers have training on them already. Well, shotguns at least. They will have to figure out precision aiming, but they get the concept well enough, and they'll have some muscle memory. Give them to the senior officers from the Signia forces. Father will pay you for them later. Prince Claudius laughed. I see how this scam works. You claim it was urgent that we needed a load of new weapons, and by the time that the bill reaches the exchequer, they're already in use. Chapter 378. Small Hands. After dinner, Dominic returned to the forge so that he could make spare parts while he studied. Technically, Amy was doing most of the work, but every 15 minutes, he had a spell to cast, and that had to count for something. Fortunately, it didn't interfere much with his studying, as he had done it so many times he hardly needed to look over to be sure that he had done it correctly. Why are you studying tonight? Do you think that it will make a difference in your mission? Amy asked curiously, as she mixed up more clay. If I'm making spell gems in combat, check me for a head injury. No, I just want to know it before I go so that I'm not distracted while I'm in the field. She gave him a disbelieving look, but Dominic looked confident that he would manage to figure out the technique in a single day of studying. Then, Dominic began to channel mana, and a small blue gem appeared in front of him. I get it. That's kind of a pain in the ass, you know? Just trying to cast it gives me a headache. Dominic muttered to himself as Amy stared, shocked to the core by what she had just witnessed. How did you do that? Just like it says in the book. See, the directions are right here. Amy blinked slowly, then decided to rephrase the question. How did you do that instantly? Mana? Again with the slow blink. She was not getting through to him. Perhaps because Dominic had no idea what he had done. Imbuing the gem with the spell typically takes hours of constant focus. She noted. Yeah, it said that here in the book, but I don't have that kind of patience, so I just made the whole thing at once instead of starting from the core out in layers. I don't recommend it. My head hurts. Amy took a wineskin from her storage ring. She had been told that dealing with geniuses was a frustrating experience, but she had never personally experienced the feeling until this moment. Everything about him, from his learning speed to his spell casting, defied common sense. How do you store that much mana? Do you have an item? She asked, hoping this might clarify things. Dominic shook his head. I used external mana for it. It's a dragon thing. External mana to make a spell gem? Is that minor illusion? Dominic nodded and tossed her the gem. If you don't have it, attune that one and let me know if I did it right. You clearly didn't do it right, but that doesn't mean that it didn't work. Unfortunately, I already know the spell, so I can't attune this one. However, I can test it. Amy explained. She cast Identify on the spell gem and smiled. It's functional. A proper spell gem for the minor illusion spell. Is there a reason you made it egg-shaped instead of faceted? Dominic shrugged. I'm not great with geometry. If I was looking at a well-cut gem, it shouldn't be an issue, but I am a big fan of eggs. I can get that shape right every time. Fried eggs, scrambled eggs, poached eggs, pickled eggs. Amy agreed. Remind me later. Before I leave, I need to borrow a jar of Miss Beth's kimchi pickled eggs. Dominic informed her.
Before we leave.
I will go with you, as there is nothing for me to do here if you're gone. Besides, I'm probably more experienced as an adventurer than you are. Dominic doubted that. He might not be a member of the guild, but he had certainly hunted his share of monsters over the years to keep a roof over his head. With the number of times that he had been run out of town and had to leave everything behind, he was always in need of money. Meet me here in the morning, and we will go to the guild. If they can get us a force on short notice, we should be able to take a portal in the right general direction and go hunting for the monster horde. Dominic suggested before casting one last, clay to steel, spell to finalize a batch of pistol parts. I don't suppose that I can get an advance from you for a couple of those pistols? I will pay you back when we get loot. She asked eagerly, while staring at the parts. Tell you what, I will make a batch of 10 special ones, better than what I sell to the Merchants Guild. Most wouldn't be able to afford to buy them, but I don't mind taking all your loot and having you work off the difference. Dominic joked. You underestimate a battle mage of the Duskblade sect. Amy retorted. Dominic chuckled and refrained from mentioning that she was 140 centimeters tall and probably not out of her early teens. Calling her a battle mage was generous. You're going to make better weapons? I'm totally in. I don't care if it's rare grade and I have to hunt 1,000 monsters to pay it back, I want it. Dominic laughed. If you don't prefer a pistol, I can make you a different weapon later. I might not be great with the fine details like pops, but I can make you a pretty solid energy blade. Amy nodded. We will see how the battle goes. A rare energy blade would be wonderful if it were on a dagger-sized or smaller base. But as short as I am, revolvers are better. Dominic looked at her hands and sighed. This isn't going to work. The revolvers are too large for your hands. Lay out a sheet of clay for me, and I will make a smaller frame to fit your hands. The rest of the mechanisms will work with it. He decided. Most pistols were made for a man's hands, and they were slightly large for most ladies to begin with. Not unusable, but not as comfortable as they could be. Chapter 379. Best yet. Amy laid out the clay for frames, while Dominic formed clay to make new cylinders. Instead of 6 shots, these would only hold 5, but that allowed them to be smaller for an overall less bulky weapon. Reloading slightly more often was a drawback for a revolver, which already had limited ammunition. But most things didn't take 5 shots to die, much less 6. The young mage watched carefully as Dominic customized a pair of pistols for her hands, and then handed him a piece of elephant tusk to make handles. Ivory will look good. Don't worry about the sockets. The spell gems are too large for the smaller weapons. She explained. Dominic nodded, and then took the time to add a few decorative details to the frames before he cast the clay to steel spell. Then, he quickly assembled the weapons and carved the grips to test fit them before enchanting. They would have to be removed for what came next, but before he started the enchanting, Dominic assembled the 10 pistols from the last batch of castings so that he had top-tier weapons to offer the adventurers. He put away the bucket of oil he had been using and took out a bucket that had a level 20 ogre core ground into it. He could tell already that his headache was going to be a migraine by morning, but he slowly portioned the bucket into 12 smaller containers and saturated all of them with mana for the process. Amy wondered why he needed all 12 ready at once instead of doing them one after another, as he usually did. But she didn't ask any questions as Dominic carved a few final details into the pistols and then stepped back from the forge. Stand behind me for a second, he instructed. Amy moved, so she was technically behind him, but still had a clear view of the forge. She wasn't going to miss this process when it was clearly different from what she was used to seeing. Dominic took a deep breath, and then the forge filled with dragon fire. The heat singed her eyebrows, and she quickly dumped water over her head covering, so her hair didn't burn. She had to close her eyes against the heat, and so missed what came next. But she could hear the pistols being dropped into buckets, and then Dominic cursing as he realized that he had scorched his own clothes by using dragon flame indoors. But the pistols were finished, except for the need to attach the ivory handles to the ones made for Amy.
Sorry about that.
I forgot how intense that gets indoors. It was actually much more intense than he remembered. Twice, possibly 3 times as intense, in fact. However, the results were beautiful. Dragon Breath Revolver of Swiftness, Rare Grade, Level 20. Adds fire damage to all attacks, increases attack speed. 1 mana per shot to reload. While Amy recovered and bemoaned the loss of her eyebrows, Dominic attached the handles to her new revolvers and then flipped all the window covers on the forge open to let the heat out. "You are insane," she noted, but in the fun way. "Here you go. I hope you have a particularly bountiful hunting excursion, because those are not cheap." Dominic agreed. Amy stared at the 2 gleaming silver pistols in her hands, with their bright white pearl grips. There was no question about it. Those 2 weapons were worth more than everything else that she had ever owned combined. "And you plan to sell these?" she asked, gesturing to the others. "Well, I will keep 2. They're shiny. But that leaves me 8 of them to sell." He had already made mana revolvers at this quality for himself, but they had taken much more work, as he couldn't use clay to steel well enough at that time, and they gave mana on hit, instead of adding fire damage. The others were sure to sell. He could give Bella a discount on a pair, and there were other gunslingers among the adventurers. At least 1 or 2 of them would want a rare grade mana revolver. Amy shook her head. Unless they had rare items to trade, a level 20 rare grade pistol could buy an entire merchant caravan, including the contracts for the guards for the season. Expecting some random adventurer from the guild to buy one was completely unreasonable, but that appeared to be Dominic's default state of mind. He didn't understand market pricing at all. There were no weapons like this on the market, so they were virtually priceless and irreplaceable. Even if you wanted to commission another one, you could travel entire countries without finding a craftsman capable. "You should save those for visiting royals. They're unaffordable," she suggested. "Oh, that's a great idea. I will sell them to the royals. They can afford them, and they can get good stuff that nobody else has, like new rare grade blueprints. I have gotten a few rare blueprints as drops in the past, but they're challenging to come by." Brilliant suggestion. From the back porch of the manor, Elder Manif and Alexis listened as the faint voices from the forge carried through the still night air. "Your Highness, you might be the luckiest woman on the planet," the elder whispered. "How so?" "You're the only person in the world who is guaranteed never to be set against him." "Have you identified those pistols in Acolyte Amy's hands?" he replied quietly. Alexis shook her head. "They're level 20 rare grade weapons." Alexis smiled. "The same as he made for the Royal Guard, only theirs are rifles, and the pistols they carry are uncommon. It appears that your young acolyte is in deep debt to the Duke." Elder Manif scoffed. "Young acolyte, my ass. That is a tiny monster in human skin." Alexis decided not to follow up on that comment. If the elder believed that it was safe enough to let her work with Dominic, then she was trustworthy. She also didn't sense any sort of romantic interest from either of them, and the little mage wasn't the flirty sort, so she didn't object. But seeing the girl staring lovingly at her new weapons, Alexis could understand what the elder meant. Just like Dominic, there was something broken in that girl's mind. If they were going out hunting together, she would have to ensure that someone was with them so that the pair didn't go feral in battle and wander away. Chapter 380. Gather the Adventurers. The next morning came entirely too early, but Dominic managed to make it to breakfast on time. Everyone was in a rush, with adjutants and advisors coming and going while the officers and royals ate. Even Alexis had members of her royal guard coming and going during breakfast, when they would usually be sitting and eating. Dominic felt a bit like he had been excluded from the fun. But his part of the dance would start in a few minutes, when he headed over to the Adventurers Guild to look for a party to go with him, looking for monsters. Amy was at the far side of the table, next to Pops and Mead, and she had brought a pair of mages that Dominic didn't recognize. Men in their 30s who looked like they should be competent adventurers, wearing sun-faded Duskblade sect robes. "Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. However, I am off to the Adventurers Guild. I will send you a message as soon as I get in place. Dominic informed them. You will? Alexis asked, suspicious of his intentions. I have a radio now. With the airships in the area, it shouldn't be a problem for me to send messages to and from the battlefield. I will take a team and start to pick off their scouts while we place the portals for the army. I am assuming that the mages have prepared. Dominic explained. The men nodded in unison. We have targeting beacons. Once we activate them, the sect will know that we're ready to open a portal to the location within a meter or two. That was good enough for Dominic, so he waited for them to finish their meals and then went straight for the Adventurers Guild, where he could see a member of the Royal Guard leaving and a large group gathered by the door. Duke Dominic, right on schedule. The Royal Guard informed us that you've got a high-paying mission for us today. Indeed I do. There is a solid reward for the monsters killed, but there are also so many of them that it will be a windfall for the adventurers who choose to take up the mission. Dominic agreed. That's a lovely way to say that it's a suicide run. One of the men noted. If it was a suicide run, I wouldn't be going myself. But I won't pretend that it's not dangerous. There will be thousands of goblins and hobgoblins, an unknown number of ogres, plus gnolls, warats, centaurs, and a strong chance of Eton mages. The adventurers looked shocked. Some of those monsters were incredibly dangerous, especially the Eton mages. Is there a reason that so many monster clans have gathered? The guild master asked. The rebel prince from Dagos gathered them in our territory to use against his enemies. Us included, naturally. We spotted them before he could take action, and now we're gathering forces to surround and eliminate them. But before the military arrives, the independent forces will go in and fill our pockets. The adventurers chuckled at Dominic's description, and Bella smiled at him. Isn't it a bit dishonest for the Duke to go monster hunting before the army? Like, it's your actual sworn duty to dispatch the army to deal with foreign threats.
She asked.
And I did. But they need portals placed, and I need monster cores for crafting. Guild Master Stone nodded happily. This was his kind of mission. It wasn't critical, because the army was coming. It was just a free hit at the enemy, taking the easy pickings before someone else came in to clean up. Does everyone have their guild card? The dwarf asked. Dominic shrugged, while the three mages all handed over silver-colored cards. The adventurers looked impressed by that, but Dominic wasn't quite sure how the ranking within the Adventurers Guild worked. Will this be enough for the mission? We've got 20 in all, counting yourself and the 3 you brought. Guild Master Stone asked. More than enough. Most of our task is just to pick off scouts, isolated groups, and set some portal markers for the army, so they can come and finish the job. We can adjust to however many we have available. Dominic agreed. Now, do we have anyone who can heal? I know we have at least a few mages and a gunslinger, but what other specialties do we have? He continued. Bella smiled and answered for them. There are 4 gunslingers in our group, actually. Then we have a medic who is actually an alchemist and not a cleric, but he is healing potions and they're reasonably priced. Dominic nodded. You couldn't always get everything that you wanted. Well, I will ask the mages to put a bit of extra effort into defense so that it doesn't cost us too much to get patched back up. I take it that the other 12 are warrior sorts? Does anyone have a bow or a rifle? He asked. All 12 of them raised their hands. Now, this is what I'm talking about. Everyone is fully kit and ready. If you're interested, I have some level 6 uncommon grade mana revolvers for sale as well. I normally sell them to the Merchant Guild caravan guards, but there's no reason not to sell them to you as well. Dominic added. One of the gunslingers stepped forward. Are you offering a discount? Dominic winked at him. 10% off if you buy 2. Do you take an IOU? The other adventurers laughed, while Dominic gestured grandly at Guild Master Stone. I will put it on credit against your guild membership. But you'll likely make enough in monster cores this trip to pay for the pistols, and then some. He would have to kill a lot of monsters to get that many cores, but uncommon grade weapons weren't completely unaffordable. The pistols take the Signia standard pistol rounds. I'm not sure what you've got stocked. Or, you can fire them with straight mana, obviously. But if we run into an ogre, it's better to have at least a few reloads of solid shot. Dominic explained. Then he handed over the pistols, and the gunslinger checked them against his ammunition. Yep, looks right to me. Good thing, too. Signia and Axbridge both stock the same pistol ammunition, so if it was anything else, none of us would have any. He joked. Dominic shrugged. I've got the create munitions spell, so I make all my own. But speaking of that, I've got mortars as well as firearms. I will shout if I'm going to use one. They can be a bit startling the first time,